Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for our April PMI certification chat. It's terrific to have you here. My name is Andrea Brockmer, and I'll be your moderator today. And I am the Director of Project Management at Watermark Learning. And I develop and deliver curriculum in the areas of project management, business analysis, and Agile. And I also develop certification curriculum in those areas as well, and I've been doing that for many, many years. So I'm also been involved in the products and tools that we have to help you in your certification journey for the PMP, ACP, and PBA as well. So we've got our session here today. We do this every month, the first Friday of the month typically. And so our next one coming up is May 4th, and we've got also our next PBA class coming up May 7th, which is going to be a live virtual online class. We've also got anytime learning options, which are asynchronous options for these certification courses as well. So do be sure to check those out. So today's session is being recorded, and you will get a link to this after our session and time today if you want to go back and hear again any questions. And always feel free to follow up with me individually if you would like, if something occurs to you after our chat. And you'll have contact information for me in the follow-up. So my email will be here in this presentation as well. So. All right, so you'll also get a special discount that comes along with that email, so be looking for that. So get a discount on some of the products that we have to offer. As we're moving along here today too, don't hesitate to send a question in the question box. I mean, I have some things that I usually like to cover. I know there's a lot of changes that have been going on, so we'll do that. But if you've got a question, don't hesitate to send it my way, and I will answer it as we go, or just let you know that we're going to definitely be covering it in upcoming slides. So. All right, so some links that are very helpful. Let's see here. Yeah, links that are very helpful. Just take a note here. And this publication exam updates links has been really helpful, and we're going to take a look at what's on there right now here coming up. Just FYI for changes to the exams and updates. Not quite as earth-shaking as it was, say, a couple of months ago, but that's been very helpful. But some other things you may want to come back to. We've got also recorded webinars that you might want to take a look at. There's one in particular for the PBA, if that's something that you're interested in, that may have additional questions that we don't cover here that may be addressed there. So you can check that out, and of course that's free. So what I'd like to talk about today, just make sure we address what's going on with the exam changes. I want to talk a little bit about how PMI exams are developed, because it helps provide some context for what is going on with these exam changes and to help set some expectations. There's, I think, a lot of misunderstanding about what these exam updates are all about. So I do want to just take a minute to talk about that. Also, what do you need to know based on what exam you're taking, or which test, which version? And also I want to just highlight some of the things in the PMBOK 6th ed, and it's kind of a behemoth of a document, and talk a little bit about how to kind of digest what's in the new PMBOK, or the updated PMBOK. Just a quick comment about the PBA, the new standard. And I love to take a look at certification numbers, so we'll do that. And then some study tips, and again, along the way, if you've got questions, just shout them out by way of the question box there. All right. So here's that link I was talking about, the updates link from the PMI website. And this is always good to just check. It's been very helpful in the last number of months as we've been monitoring this and just trying to pay attention to when things are actually going to be updated. So everything's pretty updated at this point for the most part. There's the PFMP exam update that hasn't been announced, but there aren't very many of those folks. So the PBA update was the last one that we saw, so and that just got updated recently, and we now know that June 25th is the date for that exam change. The CAPM coming up to on May 21st. So, yeah, so just a comment about PMI exams and how they are developed, because I think people hear that a new exam is coming, you know, that one of the exams is being updated, and there, you know, people think it's going to be like a whole new exam and that there's just major changes, and that's not always the case. There are a number of things that can drive an update to a PMI exam, and so we'll take a look here. But PMI certifications, with the exception of the CAPM, it's important to understand that their certifications are not based on books. They're not book-based tests. They are role-based exams. They are testing on your knowledge and skills and abilities to fill a role. They are not book-based, again, with the exception of the CAPM. So what goes into the development of exam? It starts with a role delineation study. And what they do is they commission people to go out into the field and look at people working in the role of project manager or working in the role of business analyst in the context of a project or a program. And they go out around the world and they see what these people are doing, and they identify the tasks and the skills that they utilize and need to be able to do on the tools that they use. And they do this every few years, and then these folks put together what's called an RDS, a role delineation study, that identifies what those folks are doing. From that, then, there is the development of an exam content outline, or an ECO. And this is often a very underutilized resource in preparing for a PMI test. This is actually the blueprint for the exam. This is the basis from which exam questions are developed. And it identifies the domains that people work in, and then the tasks in those domains. It identifies what people need to be able to do and what they need to be able to know in order to fill that role. That's really the basis for understanding what's going to be in the test. And in fact, when you get your test results, it will tell you how well you performed against each one of the tasks in each domain. And then from there, they go back then to the standards, the published standards, PMI's publication standards and guides, and other industry standards, because PMI doesn't profess to have the only documents that are pertinent to those disciplines. But they go back to the standards, and then they make sure that their exams are developed using terminology that is consistent with those standards. So they're making sure that questions are rooted in the profession's broad body of knowledge. That is the whole library out there in project management or business analysis and within projects. And so that's really the intention of those guides and standards. You can see that that's really the last step after developing these other things. So when there is a new guide or standard, such as the PMBOK 6th Ed, or now the Guide to Business Analysis, a new publication, all they're doing is making sure that the exams are reflecting the language in those, that any changes in terminology and language are, that the exams are aligned with those things, that their exams are aligned with any updates to terms and language. The bigger and more significant drive for an exam change is actually when they every few years go out and do a new role delineation study, and then the resulting ECO. That's actually a bigger driver for more significant changes. In the year 2018, the CAPM is the only exam that is being updated as a result of a new RDS and ECO. Changes to the PMP, PBA, and ACP exams are all actually a result of alignment or just reconciliation with revised standards. So this is not to say that the exam isn't changing and that you need to be aware of it, but it's not the biggest driver of changes to an exam. Okay. So I like to kind of talk a little bit about that to give you some context about about the nature of the changes here that people are talking about this year. So here is just a quick kind of an overview of what's going on right now. Kind of we're right in the middle of things here with the exams that people are interested in, and the dates, and then key resources to be thinking about. So obviously a couple weeks ago, the PMBOK 6th Ed on March 26th became the source for studying for the PMP. Okay, so right now what you want to study is, or what you want to use for resources is the ECO. Oops, you know what? This is incorrect here. I think there was a cut and paste from the wrong place. I am sorry. Hang on just a moment. Let me come back to that one. Hang on here. Okay. There we go. So the PMP exam changed on March 26th. So the key resources you're going to use there are going to be the exam content outline and the PMBOK Guide 6th Ed. Our course materials are in the process of being updated, and we will have information soon about the status of our updated materials. And so you can check online. I think we've got a class scheduled for July, and I'm not sure what will be happening before that at this point. But right now, the 5th Ed of the PMBOK guide is history. We're done with that. We're using the 6th Ed at this point. Okay. The PBA then we're looking at June 25th is the date for the exam update there. So the resources for studying for that will be the ECO, our study guide, and the PMI practice guide. So right now, if you're taking the exam between now and June 25th, these are the things you'll want to use, our course materials. And my recommendation is to just go ahead and start using the PMBOK 6th Ed. Now, bear in mind, if you're studying for the PBA, there are some sections in particular that you want to be aware of from the PMBOK for the purposes of PBA, but only from the standpoint of understanding what it is that the project manager does and how your work as a BA working on a project would interface with that. You don't need to be studying the PMBOK like you would if you were studying for the PMP. So you don't need to get concerned about inputs, tools, and outputs for processes and things like that. You're going to want to take a look at the quality chapter and the scope chapter for sure. Use that practice guide. The practice guide has some really great what they call collaboration points, where the BA and the PM are collaborating. So just use those as kind of a springboard to go into the PMBOK and see what it is that the PM is doing, really understanding the processes. But you can go ahead and start using the 6th Ed at this point. And then if you take the exam after the exam change or the exam update on June 25th, the big change there, and our course materials will be updated. The big change there is going to be then they have the PMI Guide to Business Analysis. So it isn't that you're going to ignore the practice guide. That's still going to be a source, but you're going to need to spend some time on the PMI Guide to Business Analysis. And the PMI Guide to Business Analysis is to business analysis what the PMBOK is to project management. So it's kind of lengthy, but for those that are already familiar with the PMBOK, it's going to be very familiar in format. Okay. Now, again, the ECO is not changing. And so, you're just going to want to understand what's in there. And I would not spend a lot of time too focused on inputs, tools, and outputs like you might be, like the degree that you might be for the PMP. Okay, and then the ACP, that exam was updated on March 26th. Pretty minimal, actually. The bonus about the ACP exam is all you really need to do is avail yourself of the Agile Practice Guide, which comes bundled with the PMBOK 6th Ed. And it's not a real lengthy document. And it's a pretty good read. So just if you're taking the ACP, our course materials are good to go. Our online simulation exam is good to go, and you'll just want to go ahead and get that Agile Practice Guide. I think it's maybe, if you purchase it separately, I want to say it's in the $20, $30 range, something like that. And if you're a PMI member, you have access to that free. The CAPM, I don't know if anybody's interested in that. They're in the middle of a pilot stage right now. But the thing to know there is that effective May 20th, that exam will be all based on the 6th Ed. They've got an updated ECO and an updated, the updated PMBOK. And again, that is the test that's pretty much it's a book test. It's testing your knowledge of the PMBOK. Okay, and that's an entry-level exam, or it's a stepping stone certification for folks who don't have the experience to sit for the PMP. So a certified associate in project management, a little lower level exam, a little easier test, shorter test, less expensive test, and it's good for 5 years. And the thinking there is that you would take that 5 years, get your experience as a project manager, and then take the PMP. If after 5 years you want to renew your CAPM, you have to take the test over, because the PMBOK will have been updated in that time. Okay. Questions about any of that? Anybody? Okay. All right. So the PMBOK. So there's a lot of things in the PMBOK. There are some new things. They have not changed the process groups. They have not changed the knowledge areas, but they have some new sections. So for each knowledge area, there's a new section, several new sections rather. And these aren't real long or anything, but they're, a few paragraphs maybe. One of the things they've included are what they call trends and emerging practices. So for example, they talk about in the cost management chapter the idea of earned schedule, which isn't, it's been around for quite a while, but they've included it now, and in addition to using earned value, people now are using earned schedule more. In resource management, which used to be called HR management, now we see a lot of reference to the idea of self-organizing teams, which is, of course, an Agile-inspired concept. In procurement, looking at really big, expensive projects with lots of contractors using international standard contract forms, just kind of changing our perspective on that. In stakeholder management, something that comes up as a trend is having a broader view of who these stakeholders are and identifying them, and importantly, in involving all team members in engaging stakeholders. So those are just some of the examples of what they call trends and emerging practices. So you'll find those in the preface of each chapter or section. Question here, can you confirm that you are going to provide this presentation of a handout? Yes, this will be provided as a handout. All right, then they also have at the beginning of each section tailoring considerations. Now what's interesting about this is that they've always kind of talked about this stuff. When I talk about and teach, the PMBOK says all over the place, you got to scale these things, you have to make these things work for you. The PMBOK has never been presented as, here are these inputs, tools, and outputs for these 40 whatever processes, use them all the same. They always talk about tailoring, but now they've called it out more specifically, and in each section, just giving some suggested ideas of, some tailoring considerations. So for example, integration management. What's going to be the development approach? You know, are you going to use Agile, or are you going to use a more traditional predictive plan-driven approach? You're going to do a hybrid? What about scope management? What are some things that you're going to have to consider as you think about utilizing these processes? For example, how certain are we about the requirements? How stable are those? How likely are they to change? What about risk management? How big is this project? How complex is it? How far, you know, is this a real cross-functional, cross-organizational, global project? How important is it? What implications might those things have for the way you practice these risk processes? So just some specific things to call out. You know, that's nice, that's helpful. There's nothing mysterious about that. It's those are good things to think about. It's kind of handy that they do that. And then the third section that's at the beginning of each section is what they call considerations for agile and adaptive. So people ask, okay, for the PMBOK, is the PMBOK, or the PMP, with the revised updated exam, do I need to, is the Agile practice guide going to be included in that? And I would say you don't need to worry too much about the Agile practice guide for the PMP. Agile has been addressed pretty substantially in the PMBOK, and they even include Agile, you know, this considerations for Agile and adaptive environments at the beginning of each section, and then there's references to it throughout. They have the ACP exam specifically to address in more detail the things that are covered in the Agile practice guide. So my recommendation is that, I mean, I think the Agile practice guide, anybody should read it anyway. It's a good document. But for purposes of studying for the PMP, you don't need to spend a lot of time on that. But at the beginning of each section, then, they have, okay, what things do you need to think about in terms of Agile if you're working in that kind of an environment? You know, what is the impact of uncertainty on quality management or schedule management or resource management? What are the benefits of, you know, breaking things down, chunking your work? Transparency. Okay, think about that and the stakeholders that you're working with and the organization that you're in. What implications might that have? Regularly reviewing your work. The idea of lessons learned and retrospectives along the way, collaborating, those kinds of things. So, you know, again, these are things that I've been talking about for a long time in terms of, you know, PMI and the PMBOK has never suggested that here are these processes and you implement them this way and this way. I mean, we work in rolling wave and adaptive. That could be a consideration. Those are things you need to think about. But here they call it out and just have these sections. So I think that's been a nice improvement, I think. Now the thing is, here's the deal. A couple of things about the PMBOK 6 that, first of all, it's big. It is 756 pages. And if you get the hard copy, they're really thin. They're almost like hymnal pages. And the worst thing is they're these icky gray, it's just these gray pages that are really hard to read. So it's not pleasant reading, not only because it's so dang long, but just this icky format that they've got it on. And the reason they've got these gray pages, it's a way of protecting their IP so that if you make a photocopy, which you are not supposed to do, it has do not copy all over it. So that's what they've done as a means of protecting keeping people from copying it. Unfortunately, it just makes it a very difficult document to actually sit and read for any length of time. It's just not a pleasant thing. So there have always been different sections in the PMBOK, but this one has truly inspired a fresh look at how do we really digest this thing, because you're just not going to sit down and read it cover to cover or big, huge chunks of it at a time. So, you know, I took a look at it and I said, okay, here's how I would approach it. I've got there are these different sections. What's in these sections and how can I really break this thing down to make some sense of it so that I can actually consume it? So the first part is the introduction. Talks about the environment in which project managers are working, the role of the PM, and then it goes into all the knowledge areas. So the introduction, environment, role of the PM, you know, that might be even a chunk that you take, and you can, you know, break those down and read those. That can be really helpful. And take that as just, those are sort of, you know, standalone chunks that you can take on. And then all of the knowledge areas, that's kind of the meat of, you know, the inputs, tools, and outputs, and the processes. Not that the PMP is testing you specifically on inputs, tools, and outputs, but that's where we really kind of have that structure that we use as sort of the scaffolding to hang everything else on. You can maybe put that on the back burner, that part, and then take a look at the standard, which starts on page 539. And the standard actually presents some high-level concepts, and then it goes into the processes. Now there are 49 processes by process group. It's got all the processes organized instead of by knowledge area like it is in part 1, and the standards are organized by process group. That's helpful because that's actually how the exam is organized. That's also how the ECO is organized. So you can take a look at these processes and understand the benefits of them, and it just looks at inputs, tools, and outputs. So here's this process, here's what comes into it, here's what I need to get out of it. And it isn't all the distraction around these tools and techniques, because sometimes when you're reading about these processes and it's like, oh my God, these inputs, and then all these dang tools and the output, it just gets a little squirrely. So this is just pulls it up a little bit, and you kind of get a sense of, okay, in initiating, here's what I'm doing. Here's the process, here's what I need for that, here's what I get out of it. It's just a little higher level. It's a good way to start. It's a good place to start. Then there's all these appendices and the glossary and the index, and these appendices can be pretty helpful. Appendix X1 actually includes the 6th edition changes. What are the changes from 5th to 6th edition? So, you know, that can be handy. Now, if this is your first experience with PMI testing, you know, and you don't need to distract yourself with the differences between 5th and 6th edition. You don't need to know. That isn't going to be very helpful. But if you are trying to keep track of, okay, maybe I was studying 5th ed for a while, I didn't get the test in, so now I'm going to switch to 6th ed, this will be helpful. Okay, so, you know, there's things like, it includes rules for handling inputs and outputs. So inputs become outputs, and then inputs from outputs may come from outside the project. But for the most part, you're looking for a flow from outputs to inputs. Now, things like that could be helpful to understand. And then X1.11 to 1.22, those are the changes within each knowledge area. Again, not detail you need to know unless you've already kind of spent some time with 5th ed, and it would be helpful to know what the differences are, what the updates are. Then X3, Appendix X3 includes those agile, iterative, adaptive, and hybrid environments, some of those considerations that were at the beginning of each section, organized by process groups. So now it's talking about, okay, agile and, you know, what kind of a approach you're using. And instead of looking at that for each knowledge area, it looks at, okay, what about agile, working in an agile, adaptive, or hybrid environment in initiating? How does that, what are things to think about there? What about agile, adaptive, and planning? I mean, that's great. That's really helpful stuff. X4 are those key concepts per knowledge area. So again, remember I was talking about some of those key concepts that are at the beginning of each section. Now they're organized all in one place. And those same with those tailoring considerations. So they're consolidated, and then you don't have to, you can just be thinking about, you know, that may be a good exercise. Maybe I don't have a lot of time. Maybe I just want to be thinking about, all right, how would I tailor things? And rather than having to flip through all those hundreds of pages, you've got just that section there on tailoring considerations. So check those out. I think those are really helpful. It's a different way of slicing things and makes it a little easier to consume. And then Appendix X6 is the tools and techniques. And what they've done is there's a lot of the same tools and techniques that show up, but they've grouped them. They've done, you know, decision-making tools and techniques, or prioritizing tools or techniques, or different kinds of tools and techniques. And it can be a little, you know, there's a lot of them. And so this reference can be very helpful. You can see where those tools and techniques are used. And what they do is the first time they mention a tool or technique, it's defined, and then subsequent times that that tool and technique is used, then they say, as described in section, 5.2.3.1 or whatever, and then you got to go back there and remind yourself what it is. So this can be very helpful because you can see where is that tool and technique defined, where is it used. It's just a good resource, and I think everybody, once you look at it, will put a flag in there in the PMBOK, and you'll use it in different ways. But I think that was a great addition. So those are just some thoughts I have about the PMBOK. Then this is the document. This is the PMI Guide to Business Analysis. Okay, so until now they still have the practice guide, which is actually intended to be a document that helps you actually use tools. It's intended to be more pragmatic, that really actually describing how to do things, to use particular models or whatever. This is a guide to business analysis, and this is to business analysis what the PMBOK is to project management. Okay, so this is very similar. It's got processes. It's got 35 processes. It includes 6 knowledge areas, 6 process groups. It's got inputs, tools, and outputs. It reads very similarly. The pages are white. They're much easier to read. This is not nearly as dense as the PMBOK. Of course, this is their first stab at this as well. Why didn't they call it the project management body, or the business analysis body of knowledge? Because that term title's already been taken. The International Institute for Business Analysis already has a BABOK. So they're calling it the Guide to Business Analysis. I know the names get really confusing. I still get confused sometimes, and I talk about this stuff every day. So, but at any rate, June 25th, the change that's happening is that the terms and the language used in the exam is getting aligned with the terminology from this document. I would not expect to see tons of questions about inputs, tools, and outputs and things like that. Again, it's a role-based test. You're going to see scenario types of questions. And until that RDS gets updated, which I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know if it'll be later this year or next year or when. But they're looking primarily at terminology updates. So until the 25th, I would continue to use the practice guide as a major source, and then the resources that we have for our study guide and our materials. Okay. All right. And then here, I don't know, I like tracking numbers for some reason as it relates to certification. So I keep track of how many people are certified in these different, how many people have different PMI certifications. So, and I couldn't find March's numbers. We haven't received March's numbers yet. So I've only got dates through to February. And so you can see, year over year, the PBA has had substantial growth, and I think that is going to continue. So they, almost nearly 80% growth year over year from 2017 to 2018. And the first couple of months of this year were, big as well. I mean, relatively. The ACP is the second fastest growing in terms of percentage. PMI always says ACP is their fastest growing certification. I don't know what they mean by that. It's not consistent with my numbers. And when I ask, they tell me it's proprietary. They can't tell me. So I don't know what that means. But that's there's just a lot of ACPs out there. And I think they're both great certifications. That one doesn't have quite the growth straight out of the gate here this year. But I really do think that's going to continue to grow. For what it's worth, the ACP is a much less rigorous exam, and the PBA is more rigorous than the ACP, but it is less rigorous than the PMP. That is my opinion, my perception, based on having taken them all. Do you get a copy of the PMI-BA guide when you join PMI? You get a soft copy. You can download a free copy. As a member of PMI, when you join PMI, yeah, you can download their standards. it's an e-copy, and then you cannot print it. You cannot, you know, it's secured. So if you want a hard copy, you have to go buy it. And you can buy it on the website, or you can get it at Amazon, those kinds of things. So Barnes & Noble, wherever. All right. Then my pop quiz question. You didn't know you're getting, that's really, how about that on a Friday, a pop quiz question. All right, what is more fun than studying for a PMI exam? Anybody? Anybody? Everything is more fun than studying for a PMI exam. That is why my #1 tip for studying for preparing for a PMI exam is to do a little something every day, because everything that you can think of is going to be more fun than doing this. Laundry is more fun than studying for a PMI exam. So, you know, you just got to really commit to doing a little something every day. Even if it's, I tell my students, even if it's just 5 minutes of looking at flashcards or writing something down, you keep a steady drip of this stuff on your brain until you get it done. So every single day, 7 days a week, every 24-hour period, one little thing for each little box on the calendar. Otherwise, what happens is it gets away from you, and once one day gets away, or 2 days to 3 days, then it's just hard to get back on track. It's really easy to kind of let it slip out of your mind. So my top 10 PMI certification preparation tips. #1, did I mention? Do a little something every day. That's #1. #2 is think about, in terms of the amount of time, and of course it depends, everybody's different, but a boot camp is, you know, 30-some hours, 35 hours to get you the PDUs that you need, and I would be looking at least 40 hours after that. So sometimes people will say 100 hours, or maybe not though. You may not need 100 hours, but it's a substantial investment, that's for sure. So that's 40 hours in addition to a 30-some hour prep class. So you got to read the guides, the standards in whichever exam you're talking about. So for the PMP, it's the PMBOK. For the PBA, it's either the practice guide or the BA guide, depending on when you're taking the test. For the ACP, it's the Agile practice guide. So make sure you read those, and yes, you need to read them. I have students say, do I really have to read the PMBOK? So my answer to that is, well, I know people that have taken the PMP and actually passed without reading it, but that wouldn't be my recommendation. I've also had people come back and say, well, that didn't go very well. Do I really need to read the PMBOK? The answer is, well, yeah, I think you do. You need to know what's in there. You need to understand how it's organized, and just get yourself thinking like the PMBOK. And then supplement with our study guide, our resources, our online study exams. Figure out, you know, break it down, one chapter, one domain, one knowledge area at a time, and then do drills in those areas, whether it's our online simulations or whatever, you know, kind of focus on one area or chapter or domain at a time. Use our flashcards or create flashcards. So we've got some flashcards that come with some of our classes, but also, you know, a really great sort of nuts and bolts certification prep technique is to go to the drugstore and get some, you know, or go to wherever and get, you know, 79-cent package of recipe cards, or, you know, note cards, and just create your own flashcards as you're studying. Your brain does something different when you write stuff down, and then just kind of take them with you. And I know there's a lot of there's apps and stuff out there too, but there's for me, and you got to know your learning style too. I think that's served me well, is to have just something I can write down, kind of purge as I'm studying, and then I can take those with me if I've got a few minutes here and there. Practice doing simulations in mixes of questions. Keep studying until you're getting at least 80%. I'd say well into the 80% on practice tests. So you want to be really doing better than you need to for the test. And practice your brain dump. So you're going to get an opportunity to do a brain dump at the beginning of your test. And so think about what are you going to do? What are you going to include in that? And the PMP and the PBA, you're likely to get pencil and paper. The ACP, you're likely to get a whiteboard and a dry erase. So kind of think about that as well. If you want to know for sure, you really ought to reach out and contact Prometric, because it is up to Prometric in terms of what you get. And that you can do a dry run with Prometric too if you really struggle with test anxiety or really want to know what you might have. About $30 to go do a dry run there. And then get plenty of rest before your exam. Don't go in fatigued. So that's what I've got. Any questions? Anything at all that comes to mind? Is there anything I didn't answer, or anything you want to look at again, or anything I can help you with? I'm just curious. How many of you out there are interested in the PBA? How many are here for we're looking for info on that? If you can raise your hand, just for numbers' sake. Okay. How about ACP? I'm going to put hands down. ACP, anybody? Okay. How about PMP? Okay. Mostly PBA. Yeah, I think the PBA is a great certification. I think they're all great certifications. I'm a big advocate of certifications. Certifications don't make you a good practitioner. I would never suggest that. But when you get certified, it really forces you to understand a discipline. It forces you to understand, the standards in that discipline. It forces you to make peace with the language in that discipline. It just makes you more refined as a professional. It doesn't make you good at practicing, but it makes you more refined. And the exercise of preparing in and of itself has value. So I have not once taken a certification exam and not found it to be really, really valuable. And I will tell you, in 20 years of doing this, I've never had somebody come back and say, I got a certification, and boy, was that a waste of time. Never heard that. So I think it really is something that is time well spent. And I think that you will find for your own practice and for your marketability, for understanding what you do advocate and what you don't. Maybe certification highlights for you things that you don't think are right in the discipline that need to be changed, or directions that you want to help your organization take. If you are well-founded in that discipline, which includes understanding the standards, then you're just in a way better position to have really substantive conversations with your stakeholders about the direction that you think they should go. So I just think it's really, it's time well spent. Is it worth it to have more than one, PBA and CAPM? Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. You bet. And the thing about the thing about having a project management and a BA certification is because how many of us end up doing both? I'll tell you what, PMs out there, and I am put my cards on the table. I'm a PM at heart. That's just what makes me tick. But as my role evolved, and I started looking more and more years ago at business analysis, and you start looking at the PBA and the resources around that, and talking with BAs. PMs do a lot of business analysis, and so it's like it just gives you a whole different perspective on your role, and really clarifies what is project management, what is business analysis. When am I functioning as a project manager? When am I, operating as a business analyst? Why is that important? What are the skills that happen or that are required in one role or the other? How can I do those most effectively? They are very different things, and it's super helpful. And then when I find myself, needing business analysis skills and working with folks in that role, it just clarifies so much for me what my expectations ought to be. What do I need from that? It's been huge. So I think it's great. The qualification hours seem outrageous in terms, oh yeah. So yeah, so for the PMP, you need a lot of hours of experience, as I presume that's what you're talking about. So for the PMP, if you have, let's see here. So if you have I don't have that in this presentation. If you have a degree, a college degree, and they only care about bachelor's degrees, they don't care about master's or advanced degrees of any kind. If you have a bachelor's degree, you need 4,500 hours of project management experience, leading and directing projects, okay? You actually need 3 years, 36 months, totaling at least 4,500 hours, and that needs to be within the last 8 years, okay? If you do not have a college degree, if you have an associate's or a diploma, then you need 5 years of experience, 60 months of experience, totaling at least 7,500 hours within the last 8 years. So that seems like a lot. It's interesting though, if you think about, you know, maybe I was working as a project manager, you know, for figure 2,000 hours a year. It seems like a lot, but once you start calculating it, it takes a little while sometimes to put that stuff together. But it's doable, that's for sure. So that's for the PMP. For the, oh boy, let's see here. For the PBA, let me just tell you so I don't misstate. And you know what, I will put this information in the handout. I've got a slide that I don't have in this presentation, but I will go ahead and include that in the presentation that you guys get, if that would be helpful. Okay, so just a moment here. You know, I kind of got away from talking about that because people were so interested in all of the changes. So let me just, that's what I'll do. Just bear with me a moment if you would. Any other questions while I'm, oh, it's the same for, well, no, it's a little different because you have to have, if you're a PMP, it's different. So and then something's going to start working. Stop working here. No, no. Oh. Okay. Got it right here. I just gotta. Okay. So for the PBA, you need 4,500 hours of, yeah, and then the 2,000. So 4,500 hours with a college degree or 7,500 hours without a degree, plus 2,000 hours spent working on projects. So let me explain this. I just wanted to make sure I've got so many numbers in my head that I didn't tell you something wrong. So plus 2,000 hours working on projects. So here's the deal. The PBA is business analysis in the context of business analysis, working on projects, doing business analysis in the context of projects or programs. So what they're saying is that you have to have some project experience too. It's not just enough that you've done business analysis, but you have to have some experience working on projects. So you need 2,000 hours of project experience in working on in any capacity. Now, if your 45 or 7,500 hours that you've already documented includes business analysis in the context of projects, then you're fine. And in fact, if you have a PMP, you don't even have to worry about it because you've already documented thousands of hours. Okay. So that's the difference there for that. The ACP exam, you have to have 2,000 hours of project experience within the last 5 years and 1,500 hours of Agile experience within the last 3 years. So that one's a little more doable. Okay. So I will include this in the handout that you guys get, or the email that you get, if that would be helpful. Yeah. Oh dear. Oh, I'm glad. Oh, good. Okay. Yep. That's fine. Yeah. Anything else? Anybody? 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 Bear in mind when you are submitting your application, you want to have experience in all of the domains. So make sure that you have, for example, for the PMP, you need experience in initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, etc. Every project doesn't have to hit them all, but cumulatively your experience needs to cover all of them. For the PBA, same kind of thing. You need, analysis, needs assessment, solution evaluation, traceability monitoring. You need some experience in all of the domains. Every project doesn't have to hit them all, but you do need some in all of them. Okay? So do be aware of that. Let's see here, if you've had the job title of business analysis for the last 5 years, with that qualifier, is it really granular? So just be aware, your title is not what's important with the application process. Your title is really not the big deal. It's what you've done. So for example, I could have had a title manager, but if I was, managing a department manager, but what it's about is what you were doing, what role were you filling. So it's not really title based. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, you're going to have to provide contact information for somebody that can validate your experience. So you want to be sure that it's somebody you can get in touch with. Maybe somebody that was working on you were working in an organization that doesn't exist anymore. Maybe that person isn't there anymore. How are you going to get in touch with them in the event that you get audited? So you'll definitely need to keep that in mind. Yeah, it's regarding the work, yep, not the title. Yeah. Ooh. Okay. All right, anything else? Okay, all right, well, sorry for the hiccups there, folks, with me looking for that stuff, but I just wanted to make sure I gave you the right info, and I hope this has been helpful. Again, reach out if you need to get other questions answered, and I'll make sure I get this slide incorporated into what you get. So good luck to all of you on your certification journey, and I'd love to help you in any way. We'd love to help you in any way we can. Have a great weekend, everybody.